The night over the Black Sea began in silence, then, without warning, it erupted into chaos. Missiles streaked across the sky toward Odessa, Ukraine's last naval bastion. Explosions tore through the harbor, shaking the ground and lighting the horizon in flame. For a brief moment, it seemed Ukraine's final stronghold had fallen. But deep within command bunkers, a different kind of weapon was awakening. Not forged from steel, but from code. Hundreds of small, inexpensive drones, prepared to take flight, each no larger than a bird, yet carrying the potential to change the balance of power. Their mission, to strike at the very core of Russia's naval industry. What followed was more than retaliation, it was evolution. In one night, low-cost technology challenged billion-dollar defenses, and the world glimpsed the future of war. Could a $2,000 drone really destroy a fleet built over decades? The answer would ignite the skies. The morning of September 28th, 2025, began like any other along the Black Sea. Quiet waves, a fading moon, and the dim glow of Odessa's port lights, but that calm was shattered in an instant. At 3:42 a.m., radar operators at Ukraine's Western Naval Base detected 5 sharp streaks of light slicing across their screens. They weren't random echoes or false readings. They were moving fast, over 850 kilometers per hour, on a direct course toward the coast. "Missile launch confirmed," the officer whispered. Seconds later, alarms screamed through the bunkers. The control room's atmosphere turned electric. The data was clear. 5 caliber NK cruise missiles, launched from the Russian frigate Admiral Grigorovich, were closing in from 180 kilometers offshore. Their target, Ukraine's last major naval base, the final symbol of resistance on the Black Sea after the fall of Sevastopol. In that moment, the stakes couldn't have been higher. If Odessa fell, Ukraine's entire maritime defense network would collapse, leaving the western coast exposed and cutting off a vital corridor for grain exports. Commander Ole Morozov slammed his fist on the intercom. "All units, combat alert. NASAMS online, prepare intercept." The air defense crews responded instantly. Launchers rotated toward the sea, radar dishes whirring to life. Within seconds, 5 AIM-120C interceptors streaked skyward, carving silver arcs through the darkness. 3 Russian missiles were destroyed mid-air, their fireballs scattering over the waves like burning comets. But 2 slipped through the net. At 3:47 a.m., the first warhead struck the docked patrol boat Ukraina Thrarwelv. The 600-ton vessel split apart in a flash of white light, its hull folding like paper under the blast. The shockwave shattered windows a kilometer away. Seconds later, the second missile slammed into the maintenance hangar, detonating fuel reserves and sending flames leaping skyward. In moments, the heart of the base was engulfed in fire. The smell of burning metal and diesel filled the air. Radar masts twisted, cranes toppled, and fuel lines burst, spraying orange plumes across the harbor. 29 sailors were killed instantly. Dozens more were injured. As dawn approached, thick smoke rose over the sea, a black flag announcing a devastating blow. Yet, amid the chaos, Odessa endured. The base still stood, scarred but not destroyed. Fire crews fought through debris, rescuing survivors and preventing a chain reaction that could have leveled the entire complex. In Kiev, news of the attack arrived almost instantly. Inside the Joint Operations Command Center, senior officers gathered around a single image streaming from Odessa, a wall of flame consuming the docks. The room fell silent. For many, the attack was not just another strike. It was a challenge, a message carved in fire. General Mykola Romanenko, head of Ukraine's joint forces, stood motionless before the screen. His face was pale, but his voice carried steel. "If they strike our heart," he said, "we'll strike their veins." That single sentence reshaped the next 24 hours of the war. Ukraine's conventional arsenal was stretched thin, missile stockpiles were limited, and Western partners had yet to approve long-range strikes deep inside Russian territory. But Ukraine had something else: innovation. Over the past year, small drone laboratories across the country had been experimenting with mass-produced unmanned aircraft. Cheap, simple, and deadly when used in swarms. And so, within hours, a counterattack began to form. Not from rage, but from calculation. The operation would be known as Iron Swarm. Its goal, strike at the Severnaya Shipyard near St. Petersburg, one of Russia's largest naval construction facilities. The target wasn't chosen for revenge alone. It was a node of strategic importance, responsible for assembling Yasen M-class nuclear submarines and maintaining parts of the Baltic Fleet. To reach that far north was an audacious idea. The shipyard sat more than 1,000 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, protected by some of the world's most advanced air defense systems. Layers of S-400 and Pantsir S-1 batteries guarded the city, supported by radar networks designed to detect even stealth aircraft. But Ukraine's planners weren't aiming to outmuscle Russia. They intended to outthink it. In underground hangars, engineers and technicians began preparing 540 drones for the mission. They weren't stealth fighters or supersonic missiles. Most were improvised from commercial and military-grade parts, modified for endurance and autonomy. Some carried electronic jammers to confuse radars. Others were suicide drones fitted with shape-charge warheads capable of puncturing steel. Each drone cost less than $2,000, a fraction of what Russia spent on a single interceptor missile. Yet, when synchronized by AI-based navigation and terrain-following algorithms, their collective power could rival that of a multi-million-dollar strike package. The plan was simple but brilliant: overwhelm Russia's defenses with volume and deception. The first wave of decoy drones would climb high and scatter radar signatures, drawing fire from surface-to-air systems. Then, as the defenders reloaded and recalibrated, the second wave, low-flying, terrain-hugging strike drones, would slip in beneath the radar horizon and hit the shipyard directly. At 4:10 a.m., encrypted orders went out. The operation would launch before dawn. As Odessa's fires still burned, Ukrainian technicians moved swiftly in the dim light of makeshift hangars. Rows of compact UAVs hummed to life, their LEDs blinking in perfect rhythm. Flight controllers ran final checks, calibrating GPS waypoints and ensuring the swarm's autonomous coordination protocols were synced. The air inside the base crackled with energy, fear, fatigue, determination, all fused into one purpose. An engineer whispered to his colleague, "We're about to make history." Outside, the wind was calm. One by one, the drones rose into the pre-dawn sky, hundreds of faint silhouettes ascending like a cloud of mechanical locusts. They climbed, leveled, and formed patterns invisible to the naked eye, but perfectly mapped by digital coordinates. For years, modern warfare had been defined by weight: tanks, missiles, and billion-dollar bombers. But that night over Ukraine, the center of gravity shifted. Intelligence, not tonnage, became the decisive factor. In Kyiv's control center, General Romanenko watched the swarm take flight on a wall of glowing monitors. Each tiny blip represented a machine that cost less than a single artillery shell, but together, they carried the potential to cripple an entire industrial complex. The general turned to his staff. "This is not revenge," he said quietly. "This is proof." As the drones crossed the Dnipro and vanished into the northern night, Ukraine's soldiers stood by their screens, silent. None could predict how the operation would end, but every one of them knew they were witnessing a transformation. The era of colossal weapons and fortress defenses was fading. In its place rose a new force, agile, unpredictable, and unstoppable when guided by innovation and necessity. The first missiles over Odessa had been meant to break Ukraine's last stronghold. Instead, they triggered something far more powerful: the birth of Operation Iron Swarm, a mission that would soon carry the war deep into Russia's own industrial heart and change the nature of modern warfare forever. The clock struck 4:58 a.m., and Ukraine's counterstrike began. Across hidden airfields and abandoned factory lots, engines hummed in unison. From every corner of the country, hundreds of drones lifted off, climbing through the pale dawn until the horizon shimmered with wings. They weren't sleek jet fighters or stealth bombers, but small, unassuming craft made of carbon fiber and ingenuity. Some cost less than a washing machine, yet together they carried the power to rewrite military history. Operation Iron Swarm had officially taken flight. The swarm moved like a living organism, thousands of propellers whirring as one. The first layer of the formation consisted of Sparrow 7 electronic warfare drones, designed to jam communications and scatter false radar reflections. Behind them followed the Stingray ER attack drones, each loaded with a small, armor-piercing charge, tiny in payload but deadly in precision. Their flight path was calculated to the meter by a navigation algorithm trained on terrain data, designed to hug valleys, follow rivers, and slip under radar coverage. By 5:20 a.m., the swarm had crossed Belarusian airspace at low altitude, heading straight toward its target, the Severnaya Shipyard on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. Inside Russian command centers, operators began to notice something unusual on their radar screens. Dozens of faint returns flickered in and out of detection, too many to be birds, too small to be aircraft. Within minutes, the radar systems at the 91N6E Big Bird stations confirmed an incoming mass. Sirens blared. Orders went out. Activate all air defenses. Missile crews scrambled to their positions. Launchers unfolded. The defensive network surrounding St. Petersburg, an overlapping dome of S-400 Triumph, Pantsir S-1, and Tor M2 systems, locked onto targets. Moments later, the night sky erupted into light. Hundreds of interceptor missiles fired simultaneously, their trails crisscrossing in bright arcs. Explosions lit the clouds as waves of drones disintegrated mid-air, raining debris into the forests below. For a brief moment, it seemed the defenses were holding. In the command bunker near Kronstadt, Russian officers shouted over the roar of interceptors, convinced the onslaught had been neutralized. But that was only the first wave. While the defenders focused on the radar-visible targets above, the second wave, the True Strike Force, slipped through at treetop level. Flying barely 15 meters above the Neva River, the attack drones moved in near silence. Their composite bodies absorbed radar, their digital signatures masked by the chaos overhead. By the time Russian spotters realized what was happening, it was too late. At 5:39 a.m., the first explosions thundered across the Severnaya shipyard. One drone crashed through the roof of the submarine assembly hall, detonating near stored fuel tanks. A fireball tore through the structure, followed by a second blast that shattered every window within half a kilometer. Within seconds, columns of black smoke rose over the river. Then came another impact, this one in the welding and turbine sections. The shockwave knocked over cranes and hurled sheets of molten steel across the yard. Flames climbed higher, reflecting off the river's surface like a second sunrise. Workers fled into the streets as sirens wailed across the city. Inside, engineers shouted into handheld radios, "Fire in Sector 12, we're losing control." Minutes later, secondary explosions ripped through the compound. Stored paints, solvents, and fuels ignited in succession, turning the complex into an inferno visible from orbit. Satellite cameras picked up the heat signature as the fires merged into one massive plume. In less than 12 minutes, parts of the shipyard were unrecognizable, cranes toppled like toys, roofs caved in, and sections of the submarine assembly line were swallowed by flames. Russia's air defense operators, still firing blindly at decoys high above, were unaware that the real attack had already gutted the heart of the facility. By the time command communications stabilized, the damage was done. Local emergency services arrived as burning metal crackled underfoot. Witnesses later described the scene as a storm of fire and iron. The blast had ruptured fuel tanks and ignited warehouses containing nuclear reactor components. Windows shattered across nearby neighborhoods. The Neva River glowed with burning oil and debris. The human cost was tragic. Dozens of workers were injured, many trapped beneath collapsed scaffolding. The fires raged for hours before firefighters could even approach the main hall. Yet the full impact wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Petersburg, often considered Russia's cultural and industrial fortress, was supposed to be untouchable. Its defensive bubble, layered with cutting-edge radar and missile systems, had been breached by drones that cost less than a guided artillery shell. In Moscow, the Defense Ministry released an urgent statement claiming all drones had been intercepted and that minor fires were quickly contained. But satellite images told a different story. Commercial companies published infrared heat maps showing entire sections of the shipyard glowing bright red. Social media filled with footage from residents recording the blaze from across the river. The sky lit orange until dawn. Analysts quickly pieced together what had happened. The Iron Swarm had been more than a direct strike. It was a tactical masterpiece built on deception and saturation. Ukraine had demonstrated that no system, however advanced, could stop everything at once. When hundreds of cheap drones attacked from multiple directions, even the best defenses ran out of interceptors, bandwidth, and time. Experts began calling the operation a turning point, a drone blitzkrieg that rivaled the first use of tanks or jet aircraft. What once took bombers and squadrons could now be done by machines guided by code, algorithms, and coordination. For Ukraine, the strike was more than military success. It was symbolic justice. The attack on Odessa had been answered not with rage, but with precision and intellect. It showed that a smaller nation, armed with technology and courage, could strike deep into the industrial core of a much larger adversary. International observers scrambled to assess the fallout. Early estimates placed the total economic damage between $2.3 and $2.5 billion, including machinery losses, halted production, and the destruction of specialized assembly lines. Though the exact number of submarines destroyed remained unconfirmed, analysts agreed that construction would be delayed for years. But perhaps the most startling figure wasn't financial, it was mathematical. Operation Iron Swarm had cost Ukraine less than $1 million in total hardware. The cost ratio was staggering. For every dollar spent, Russia lost over 2,000. That disparity sent shockwaves through military circles worldwide. In Washington, think tanks called it proof that quantity has become quality. In London, defense analysts drew parallels to the Battle of Britain, when innovation and coordination overcame brute strength. Even within Russia, murmurs of unease spread. How could one of the world's most fortified cities be pierced by low-cost machines? And if this could happen in St. Petersburg, what about Moscow or anywhere else? By sunrise, the fires at Severnaya still burned. Smoke curled into the sky like a warning to the world. On screens across Ukraine, soldiers watched in silence as satellite feeds displayed the aftermath. The mission had achieved what no conventional strike ever could. It shattered the myth of invulnerability. General Romanenko's words echoed through Kiev's command center. This is what happens when intelligence leads the battlefield. The Iron Swarm had proven that modern warfare was no longer about who had the largest missiles or the deepest pockets. It was about adaptability, coordination, and the courage to think differently. As dawn spread across Eastern Europe, the balance of power shifted ever so slightly, not through force of arms, but through a symphony of electric motors, algorithms, and human determination. The skies over Odessa had burned first. Now the skies over St. Petersburg burned in reply, and in that mirror of destruction, a new era of warfare was born, one where ingenuity outmatched might, and where thousands of small wings could carry the weight of history itself. By sunrise, the fires that had turned the Severnaya shipyard into an inferno were still burning. Columns of black smoke rose above St. Petersburg's skyline, drifting over the Neva River like bruises against the morning sky. Firefighters, soldiers, and volunteers worked in chaotic unison, dousing the flames that had consumed one of Russia's most prized naval complexes. The air stank of fuel, charred steel, and salt water. What had begun as a single night of explosions was now becoming a national crisis. At 7 a.m., Moscow's defense ministry issued a confident statement claiming that all enemy drones were intercepted and that damage was minimal. But within hours, satellite imagery, smartphone footage, and civilian videos painted a starkly different picture. Large sections of the shipyard were in ruins, roof structures collapsed, cranes twisted into melted frames, and entire workshops reduced to rubble. The reality could no longer be denied. Independent analysts confirmed that the shipyard's operations were paralyzed. 3 submarine hulls under construction were visibly damaged, though their exact condition remained uncertain. Several dry docks had been flooded by ruptured fuel and cooling systems. Even if repairs began immediately, experts estimated that naval production would be delayed for at least 18 to 24 months. For a nation that had spent decades cultivating the image of impenetrable defense, the psychological blow was immense. St. Petersburg was not just a shipyard, it was a symbol of Russia's industrial and military pride. To see it burning on live feeds from orbit was something few could have imagined. The cost of one-night economists began calculating the damage as images spread across international media. The estimates were staggering, between 2.3 and 2.5 billion in losses. But this figure didn't tell the full story. Beyond the physical destruction lay a deeper wound: logistical paralysis, production halts, and the erosion of confidence in the very systems meant to protect the homeland. Factories connected to the shipyard supply chain, steelworks, turbine manufacturers, reactor module producers were forced to suspend operations pending inspection. Thousands of workers were displaced. For Russia's defense industry, the attack wasn't just a loss of materials, it was a disruption of rhythm, a jolt that rippled through the entire network of naval construction. In Kyiv, the mood was entirely different. Inside Ukraine's military command, the success of Operation Iron Swarm was met with silent awe rather than celebration. The officers who had watched hundreds of dots vanish into the northern night now saw the results on their screens. Satellite photos showing the destruction, intercepted Russian communications in disarray, and foreign analysts acknowledging the attack as a turning point. Ukraine had achieved something extraordinary, not just a strike, but a demonstration, a message broadcast in data and fire. The age of billion-dollar warfare was ending, the new arithmetic of war. The numbers told the story better than words. Operation Iron Swarm had cost under $1 million to execute, yet the resulting damage exceeded $2 billion, a cost ratio of over 1 to 2,000. Every $1 spent by Ukraine had forced 2,000 in losses for Russia. No missile strike, no bombing campaign in modern history had achieved such efficiency. This calculation reverberated across think tanks and defense ministries worldwide. NATO officials called the strike a textbook case of low-cost, high-impact warfare. The Washington Institute for Strategic Defense described it as a demonstration that precision, scale, and coordination can outweigh mass and firepower. In London, analysts compared the event to the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, the first time tanks had changed the logic of ground warfare. Others called it the Bayraktar moment, taken to its extreme, where swarms replaced squadrons and autonomy replaced manpower. For decades, modern warfare had revolved around heavy assets, tanks, jets, ships. But Iron Swarm shattered that doctrine. It proved that small, intelligent systems working collectively could achieve what entire air wings could not. And more importantly, it showed that asymmetry, once a disadvantage, had become an asset. Ukraine didn't need to match Russia weapon for weapon. It needed only to think faster, adapt quicker, and exploit the vulnerabilities of complexity. The world takes notice. In the weeks following the attack, military analysts from Washington to Tokyo began dissecting every available detail. The U.S. Naval Institute published simulations showing that a swarm of 500 small drones could overwhelm even the most advanced destroyers' air defenses in under 5 minutes. European defense planners, meanwhile, called for new investment in counter-drone technologies, including laser arrays and AI-based tracking systems. China, India, and several NATO members accelerated their own drone swarm research programs, recognizing that the future battlefield would belong to those who could combine software with strategy. But for all the fascination, there was also unease. If hundreds of small drones could paralyze a shipyard, what could thousands do to a city's infrastructure, power grids, transport hubs, or communications? The line between military and civilian targets blurred dangerously. International humanitarian organizations began urging governments to establish ethical and legal frameworks for autonomous weapons before the technology outpaced regulation. Low cost doesn't mean low consequence, warned one European analyst. The next great conflict may not start with a missile, but with 1,000 signals launched from laptops instead of silos. The Russian reckoning.
confirming a rapidly
Inside Russia, the shock ran deep. The Kremlin convened an emergency meeting to review national air defense protocols. Investigations revealed that while radar systems had performed as designed, they were never built to handle saturation attacks of such magnitude. One insider described the situation bluntly: "We built walls for giants, not for swarms." Defense officials ordered immediate upgrades to radar coverage, frequency management, and signal deconfliction systems. Engineers began working on integrating AI-assisted pattern recognition to distinguish decoys from real threats. But analysts admitted privately that such adaptation could take years. Meanwhile, construction crews at Severnaya sifted through the wreckage. Twisted beams were cleared, scorched metal hauled away, and workers returned to salvage what equipment they could. The shipyard's official reopening date remained uncertain. What was once a symbol of pride now stood as a monument to vulnerability. The intelligence frontier. For Ukraine, Operation Iron Swarm wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a proof of concept. Within weeks, defense engineers began refining the swarm's design, exploring how AI could allow drones to collaborate even without centralized control. Instead of pilots, future operations would rely on machine learning to adapt to threats mid-flight, reshaping formations and changing altitudes autonomously. In quiet labs outside Kyiv, new prototypes took shape, smaller, faster, and even cheaper. The next generation wouldn't just react to radar, it would predict it. This was no longer a war of attrition. It was a war of intelligence, one where algorithms fought algorithms, and innovation could tip the scales faster than armies could march. And though the human cost of war remained painfully high, Ukraine's message to the world was unmistakable. Survival depended not only on courage, but on creativity. A new definition of power. As the smoke over St. Petersburg finally cleared, the world faced a sobering realization. The events of September 28th were not just a battle, they were a turning point. No fortress could claim to be invulnerable anymore. No budget, however vast, could guarantee safety against adaptability. The Iron Swarm had exposed a truth long whispered in defense circles, but rarely proven. In the digital age, power is not measured in tons of steel, but in bytes of code. In the end, the greatest weapon of the 21st century was not a missile or a submarine, it was the human mind, augmented by technology and sharpened by necessity. As Kyiv's generals reviewed the operation, one analyst summed it up best: brains have finally triumphed over steel. Operation Iron Swarm was over, but its legacy was just beginning. It had redefined the economics of war, rewritten the doctrine of defense, and reminded every nation on Earth that innovation, once unleashed, could change everything, even the meaning of victory itself. The night that began with fire over Odessa ended with smoke over St. Petersburg, but its legacy reached far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine and Russia. The Iron Swarm was more than a strike. It was a signal. A reminder that in modern warfare, victory no longer belongs solely to the nations with the biggest arsenals, but to those who can think, adapt, and innovate faster than their enemies. 1,000 small machines, each costing less than a single artillery shell, had humbled billion-dollar defenses and shaken the confidence of a military superpower. In that single night, the world witnessed the dawn of a new military era, one defined not by brute strength, but by intelligence, precision, and creativity. It proved that technology in the hands of a determined people can level the battlefield, rewrite strategy, and expose the limits of traditional power. But with innovation comes responsibility. The same technology that can protect can also provoke. The same intelligence that empowers can destabilize. The lesson of the Iron Swarm is not only about victory, it's about how humanity chooses to fight the wars of the future. At Military Worldline News, we break down these transformations, where technology, geopolitics, and human courage collide. If you want to stay informed about the tactics and technologies shaping tomorrow's battles, subscribe now. Join a global community that believes understanding warfare is the first step to preventing it. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never stop thinking beyond the battlefield.